If the Juicebox podcast is helping you, if you're enjoying it, if it's making a real difference in your life, there's only really one way to make sure that that information that's helped you helps someone else, and that's by telling someone else about the podcast. Not a lot of people know about podcasts, so please, if it's helping you, share. Hey, welcome to episode 74 of the Juicebox podcast. This episode of the Juicebox podcast is sponsored by Insulet, makers of the Omnipod, the world's only tubeless insulin pump. So I get an email from a person named Arden, who tells me they're a school teacher and would really like to come on the podcast. And as I'm going back and forth with Arden, I start seeing that Arden actually signs their name Denny. But in my head, of course, Arden is a woman because my daughter's name is Arden. But that's not the story. The story is that Denny is a school teacher who had a child in his class with type 1 diabetes. And Denny threw himself into the world of type 1 diabetes so that he could be a better teacher and a mentor to his student. Beyond that just being completely touching, and most of us hoping for something even close to that for our kids, you really need to listen to Denny. His episode is fantastic because not only are you going to see a great teacher, but you're going to see the other side of the curtain. You know, it's easy for us to talk about, like, I tried to do this with a 504 plan, and they didn't want to do it, and, you know, the school fought me, and the teachers weren't helpful. Wait till you hear a teacher tell you, I heard there was going to be a kid with type 1 diabetes in my class, and I was scared. Scared because I didn't know what I was doing. It's a great opportunity we have here to hear the other side. And to, you know, this gentleman is a once-in-a-lifetime teacher, so a lot of respect has to go out to him. It's coming from me, and I think by the time the end of this podcast comes, you will feel the very same way. All right, so that's a very long intro for an episode that I wanted so badly to call Denny is Not Arden, but I ended up not calling it that. You should know that everyone that Denny discusses in the episode, Denny has prior approval from those people to talk about them. Let me go over kind of what I know, and you'll fill in the blanks, and then we'll start chatting.
Sure.
So I got contacted by you because you said you were a school teacher who has kids who have type 1.
Yes.
But you don't have type 1 diabetes?
I don't, and I don't have any family members that have type 1. I did have 3 grandparents that had type 2, as it turns out, but no one in my immediate family with type 1.
Okay. So then it begs the initial question, how did you find the podcast?
Basically, I started, let me go back. I started at my current school 2 years ago, and as a new teacher, right before school starts, you have all these papers that you're doing, and among the many papers I had, I saw that I would be getting a student with type 1 diabetes. And I remember when I first saw the sheet, okay, well, if this happens, wait a second, this is kind of confusing. There's so much, you know.
Yeah.
How do I know what to do? You know, because if they're thirsty, if they're hungry, if they have a headache, if they need to go to the bathroom, you know, it's like, so these are all signs that there's a problem. And I remember thinking to myself, in regards to this one student, you know, my partner teacher happens to be a nurse. And I thought to myself, next year, I hope that she gets, you know, the student, because I just didn't know, will I know what to do? Will I do the right thing if there's a problem? So I did end up, by the end of the year, I actually requested the student, you know, and it ended up that he was going to be in my homeroom. And at first, I'll be honest, the beginning of this year was kind of a rough start. And I think what it boiled down to was, as a teacher, what things are truly diabetes sugar related and what is student motivation related? And can I tell the difference between the two? And so I partially started researching for knowing, well, how can I tell what's going on and how can I know what the right thing to do is?
So were you initially concerned then that there might be the possibility of the kid using his diabetes as an excuse to act up or act out or anything like that? What age group are we talking about?
This is 7th and 8th grade.
7th and 8th grade.
I have an 8th grade homeroom, but I also teach 7th grade, but I only see them for one class a day. Whereas eighth graders, especially those, so one class a day would be about 40 minutes. Whereas students in my homeroom, just because of the way it works at my school, it can be 2.5 to 3 hours a day that I'll see them.
Okay.
So it's significantly more, and at all points in the day. So I would, with someone with type 1, I can be hitting all kinds of different things.
Times of the day. What would you say was what were the main feelings you were having at the beginning of the year? Were you more afraid of a medical emergency or of letting someone down, or what do you think was weighing on you the most?
I mean, the very beginning of seventh grade, my biggest concern was medical. How will I know what to do? And it turned out everything was fine. The student was very good about, I need to go get a drink. I need to go see the nurse. We happen to have, in essence, a diabetes buddy for our diabetic students, and that person would go with them. It's mostly because I'm on the second floor. Mm-hmm. We just want to make sure there's no problem, and if messages need to be sent back and forth, there's a way to do that. So initially it was medical concerns, I would say.
Right. And so it's interesting because I know as somebody who has prepared a 504 plan for a small child, that you sit on your end trying to imagine every little thing that could go wrong, and your head gets flooded with all of the little indicators and oddities that you see that make you think, oh, my kid's high, they're low, they need insulin, they need food, that stuff. And when you try to condense it down into a document, I always say to people, no matter how well you do it, when you're talking about diabetes to somebody like a teacher for the first time, you sound like a lunatic. Right. Because you're trying to force in all you need to know this, you need to know this. And so when someone's doing that to you, it's off-putting, but not in a way you're not I don't want to do this because it's a problem. It's so much information at one time.
Where do you start?
And it's out of context too, isn't it?
Right.
Right.
Right. I mean, having researched, I think that partly when I first started listening to your podcast, watching other YouTube channels, I didn't fully understand all the language, but as I started listening more, now I could hear the nurse and the student's parent better. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what you mean when you're using those words, when you're saying, they could tell me the blood glucose level, and at first I would have, so is that a good number? Is that a bad number?
Right.
How do I know?
Yep.
Now I have a much better sense because I've been asking them questions. I've been, doing a little research on my own.
Mm-hmm. No, it's just very interesting because that's why when you reached out, I was like, this is a great idea for you and I to talk, because you have no real connection to diabetes other than being a teacher and having it kind of thrown on you because of a student. And, right. And you're obviously a person who's trying to figure it out. And by the way, thank you, because my kids have, I've seen my kids have teachers that I didn't think cared if they learned their lessons, let alone anything else. So it's really wonderful to know that people like you are out there teaching kids. Okay. I want to say as an aside, we're going to, your name's Denny, but your given name, tell people your given name.
My first name is Arden.
Arden. So for the very first number of times that we went back and forth, I just imagined you were a woman. And
really?
And it's funny because I'm sure people don't care about this, but when we named my daughter Arden and we found the name and liked it, at that time we'd gone to the registry with the government to see, and there were only about 5,000 people with the name in the whole country, and more than half of them were men. And it's just it's an older name, right. And so isn't it just funny? And my brain just jumped right to it. And then I realized going back and forth a couple of times, I'm like, this is, I could tell by how you were writing and stuff like that. I was like, this is not a woman. And and it's funny because there's this lovely woman who follows me on Facebook for my blog. And every time she says something to me, she goes, "You're a fantastic mom." And I the first time I said, "Hey, actually, I'm a stay-at-home dad." But about the third time, I just was like, you know what? Thank you.
Whatever.
I said, I appreciate it. That's great. Thank you so much.
Whereas for me, it was almost the exact opposite, because it is a very uncommon name. It's a family name for me. But I was like, wow, Arden can also be a girl's name. I never, I never encountered it.
And that's something. Yeah. So, and we just, for you, it's a family name. For us, it was a baby name book. we took one night for, for every letter in the alphabet and read through, and we circled things. It turns out we could have stopped after the first night. So, but that's all. We joke sometimes there's nobody in my family worth naming anybody after, but I'm sure the people related to me would not find that amusing at all. So you're a bit of a saint here, and please take that as a compliment, because you're putting in the extra work on your own time to understand all this stuff. And I know you've had a little contact with the kid that we're going to talk about today, and as when we make examples, and you're going to refer to him as JJ.
Yes.
Okay, and you've actually had contact with his mother, and it's okay with her if you, even though we're not going to pinpoint who she is and who they are, we're going to talk about them like that. Okay,
so they're pretty open about that. They just want to protect his name, which is very understandable. So she said use the nickname JJ, which even his friends I don't think would know who he is with that nickname, but the family would know.
Right. So great. So now this is a really good opportunity for parents who have kids who have type 1 to see what the other side of this looks like, because you always hear from people who are like, I went into the school and I explained it very clearly, and they didn't understand, and people leave frustrated all the time. But I think it's going to be good to put a face and a voice to your side of the story. So, after you realize a child's going to be given to you in your classroom, and you're very worried about the medical stuff, they come in. What was the first encounter that you had that started your relationship? I guess was it a medical issue, or what?
No, not at all. Actually. So before school started, I knew in this particular 7th grade homeroom, which I would teach once a day, I would have a diabetic student, and the student would have a diabetic buddy. It had already been assigned. But my first encounter with JJ, I didn't know that he was the student. For whatever reason, they weren't in for drop-in day, so I didn't meet them in advance of school. Mm-hmm. The first week of school, they had a test. And I visibly remember him taking the test because he was, I would call it, thinking with his whole body. I mean, he was just all over the place as he's thinking and doing his best. And he happened to finish early and was drawing some superhero characters, which I said, if you finish this test early, it's just the first week of school, you can go ahead and draw. And I walked by and, whispered to him, that's good. Yeah. And he whispered back, thank you. Right. And so I knew, I kind of like this kid. And later I found out this is the student that has diabetes. Mm-hmm. So I've later told him, in a way, I'm kind of glad that I happen to, and this isn't always going to be the case for teachers, I kind of met him as a person, as a student, before I met him as a diabetic, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. Which I'm kind of glad that it worked that way. But I even had conversations with him at the end of the year saying, you're going off to high school. You're going to be meeting a lot of new teachers. Have you thought about how you're going to introduce yourself to those teachers?
Right.
And so I don't know that there's a best way, but I would encourage parents and the students, make sure that you open that dialogue sooner than later. It's one thing for me to get that paper. It's another thing to have a conversation knowing that when I call mom or dad, here's who mom or dad are, and this is, how things are going to go.
Yeah. I mean, I've had all different kinds of experiences in the, 6 or 7 years Arden's been a student. And I've had teachers call me during the summertime in their own time and say, look, I've set aside an hour. Can we talk about this? And, really try to explain as much as you can. And I've had teachers who look at me at on the first day and go, oh, diabetes? Yeah. We'll call the nurse if there's a problem. And they don't want anything to do with it. They stay very far away from it. What I can tell you is that because of the way we manage it, Arden's teachers have more frequently than not over the last couple of years told us that by midway through the year, they sort of forget that she has type 1. And I take that as a good sign of the way we're handling things. So that's my question for you. So how does JJ handle things? If his blood sugar needs to be checked, does he go to the nurse? Does he do it himself? Does he have contact with his parents? What's your process there?
He goes to the nurse. And the process, if he usually would say, I need to go to the nurse, and he goes to the nurse. And we were told, even before school starts, if he asks to go to the nurse, asks to go to the bathroom, asks to get a drink of water, he has permission, right. He goes. And that's, you make adjustments to whatever your schedule is he needs to do that when he needs to do that, and send a buddy with him. If that buddy's not available, find someone else, kind of thing.
And what's that process like? Does he tell you like, hey, I got to go to the nurse, I feel dizzy, or does he say I have to go to the nurse because it's just time to check my blood sugar? I mean, when he's walking out the door, do you know why he's leaving, or do you?
Yes, I mean, with him, he could often do a little bit of a hand signal thing. If he kind of motions with his hand, I know he's getting a drink of water. Mm-hmm. That hand motion. But otherwise, he would be walking out and he would be saying, going to the nurse, or he'd say, "Come on, buddy," his diabetic buddy, "we need to go, now, hurry up."
Yeah, like so. And so does that. So I'm interested when you see him leaving and his blood sugar is low and that's why he's leaving. Does that affect the next couple of minutes? I mean, do you sit around wondering if he's okay, or are you able to just let him go out and like you know what I mean? Like as a person,
right?
I'm wondering.
I mean, for me, often it was almost the reverse in that there'd be times when, and maybe this was happening more later in the year. Don't you need to go check? I remember one specific conversation with him. And please understand, I have a good rapport with him and his family. I would not say this to just any student, but I said to him, the way that you're talking to me right now, you kind of sound angry. Are you okay? He said, "But I'm not angry." I said, "But your voice sounds angry right now. Right. Are you sure that you're okay? Do you think you need to go check right now?" And so there'd be times where he, in essence, would try to tough it out. But, but yeah, if he left, I'd wonder, how's it going? I would often get, the buddy would often be the one that would give me the thumbs up and say, he's good. Or he would say, he's going to be down there for another 15, 20 minutes. Right. He's resting. They have to, and he would come back. But, JJ would have to be down in the nurse for a little while longer.
So I'm interested, when he seemed angry that time, did he eventually give in to your request for him to look into his blood sugar was?
I can't remember that specific time. It took a little while. If he initiated it, he'd go right away. But if I was the one wondering if he needed to go, I think there's a little bit of that. No, I don't need to go. I don't need you telling me.
Yeah, and so that's super interesting, really, because you seem like you're coming from a perfectly thoughtful and caring place, and at the same time, you're in a weird situation. He's not your kid. You're not a doctor, right. But you're much like you hear people talk about with diabetes. The longer you live with it, you almost end up knowing better than the doctor at some point. And so you're becoming more and more, I want to say indoctrinated, but you're more and more accustomed to it being in your day, and you're seeing signs. And then how do you sit back quietly and not say anything? I mean, right. You'd be wrong too. And at the same time, it's difficult to do. Do you think you would, if you had the opportunity to speak to JJ's upcoming teachers, do you think you would tell them, look, you need to interact with them when you think you need to, but you have to walk that line of not being, you know what I mean? I don't even know what not being, what I want to say next. You know what I mean? Is it not being a doctor, not being a parent, not being...
What I would say is this. As I mentioned, especially in 8th grade, I saw him quite a bit. And I was in tune with when the parents gave the nurse permission to text me to let me know that he was there. So if he didn't show up from the previous class to return to my class, I would know he's in the nurse. Mm-hmm. So I would get texts from the nurse to kind of update me on some things. But what I would do is, as one of the junior high teachers, there are 3 other teachers that we all switch quite a bit, 7th and 8th grade. But I would tell the other teachers, just so you know, kind of having a rough morning, could you keep your eye on him? Right. Just not saying you have to bug him or whatever, but just every now and then, just see how he's doing. If you see, see something wrong, ask him how it's going.
Right.
So forth.
So it's a very kind of, it takes a village concept, and his parents are okay with that. And I would assume they would be. I'd be thrilled if you had that kind of concern, but
right.
Yeah.
I mean, as another story, this is a Catholic school, and the student is Catholic. I happen to not be Catholic, but there were actually, it was like 2 weeks in a row where we go to Mass once a week. during the mass, I could tell he doesn't look right. He's sitting like 4 rows in front of me, but it seems like he's really stressed. But he waits until the very end of the mass, and then he says, "Mr. Nelson, I need to go to the nurse." I'm like, "Well, I could tell, why didn't you go earlier?" And I talked to him about it. So finally, I talked to the priest and said, "Father, here's the situation. I have a student who sometimes has medical reasons why he needs to go." The priest said, tell that person, God understands, go to the nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Your heart was in the right place. Take care of your health. Yeah. Do what you need to do. It was like, thank you.
And you think JJ was just sitting there out of respect? He didn't want to get up in the middle.
It's respect, and it's a very meaningful thing for him. He wants to participate, and it's towards the end of the service that is a very important part. And he wanted to be a part of it. And I fully understand. But if your body is saying, no, now's not a good time, then now's not a good time. You got to take care of it.
And so does, in this specific student's case, is he wearing any kind of a glucose monitor like that you would be audibly alerted, or do you only know what his blood sugar is when he physically pricks his finger and checks his blood sugar?
Right. He has to physically prick. He doesn't have a pump, doesn't have a meter.
So he's not using an insulin pump. He's also not using what would
Correct.
be a continuous glucose monitor. So, okay. Correct. So because that's super interesting, because as he's sitting there and uncomfortable, you don't even know if he's uncomfortable because his blood sugar is terribly high or terribly low.
Right. I have no idea.
Right. And so, but gosh, that's got to be a stressful thing. Do you find it stressful, him being that much in your responsibility, but yet you not being legally, like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's such a, because you are responsible because you're his teacher, but you're not his parent or his doctor. Like, do you find that a stressful feeling?
I don't know that it was stressful is quite the right word. It's concerned. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's what do I do? I want him to be able to concentrate in all this. Actually, this brings up something that he meant. He said he gave me permission to use this particular document. Mm-hmm. He had a detention with me. There were two in a row, kind of. And the first one, they have to write a reflection, and the first one was pretty awful. I had to have him rewrite it, still pretty awful, and I just, whatever, go, right. You're done. But I gave him a different set of questions for this second detention that was like 2 weeks later, and they were just open-ended questions. I didn't really have any agenda in mind with it. There was nothing diabetes related with these questions. Mm-hmm. I think the questions were, it is a good day when, I am at my best when, I am at my worst when.
They're reflective. Yeah.
Well, I had no idea what to expect, and I was floored with how open and honest he was with me. And he did give me permission to share this on the podcast. He said, "It is a good day when my numbers are good, when I can concentrate in class and relate to my friends. It is a bad day when I can't concentrate and I can't really understand or talk to my friends because I just can't relate to them." And I realized, I know that, you can say a person gets highs or lows, but to say they really can't understand as fully when they're high or low. They really are having a hard time interacting with people when they're particularly high or low. And it really hit me when he wrote that. And I told him after he finally finished, first of all, thank you for being so open and honest and for sharing that with me. And I was actually given permission to share it with his parents, share it with the nurse, because I said, I think they would benefit from reading this.
Yeah, and it's a basic truth that I don't know if it gets ignored or underappreciated or misunderstood or what it is, but I don't think it just happens in in a situation like yours where you're sort of removed from it but still involved. I believe there's people who are spouses to people with type 1 who are, type 1 to people using man-made insulin, because this is really what the situation is if you're using man-made insulin and you've taken too much of it and your blood sugar's gotten too low, you're in a situation where your brain's not functioning the way it would normally, and you have trouble comprehending. You could get my daughter will get bouts of just like sadness out of nowhere when she's low, or she's dizzy or she's shaking or, or whatever could happen. And then high, when there's that cloudy feeling that I don't think people can really, it's not enough to call it a cloudy feeling. It's your blood sugar can get high enough that your vision can get blurry.
Right.
And on and on. Not being able to comprehend, and none of us know what it's like who don't have type 1. No one knows what it's like for your blood sugar to be so high that people are speaking around you and you can't really keep up. You don't understand exactly what's going on. You can say it all you want. Like you said, high, low, blood sugars. That doesn't do it.
What does that really mean?
Right, right.
To those of us without it, I don't really, I could read about it. I can talk about it. I don't know what it feels like.
Right. But his words put it into focus for you.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And he's doing a great service by allowing you to share it like this. And even, we talk about all the time about, community and how sharing people's stories help other people. I just never imagined somebody like you would come in that really, that doesn't have a very, a personal connection beyond like this thing that you got thrown into. And this is just such a great talk and valuable. And I'm just finding myself very pleased that you're here while you're talking. So,
thank you.
No, thank you. Okay. So do you happen to know do you know how long JJ has had type 1? Is it a newer thing in his life, or do you know if he's had it for a long time?
So I met him in 7th grade, and he just recently finished 8th grade. In talking with his parents and talking with him, I found out that he was diagnosed towards the end of his 5th grade year at the school where he currently is, or just finished up, as it turns out.
Right.
But so when I met him, he had only had it for about a year and a half or so.
He's pretty new to it. And so I'm assuming by now with all the research you've done, you've recognized that the ability to balance your blood sugar in any meaningful way it's a difficult skill to procure, and it takes a long time. And I would say that with a pen or a needle and a meter, that's tough going, to really figure out the idea of, and I don't know how deeply you get involved in it, but if you're listening to the podcast, that taking insulin at the right time before a meal could be the difference between your blood sugar not blipping at all and it going up 300 points and you not being able to think.
Well, and what gets me with it is how individual it can affect. You could have, if I had a second diabetic that was the same age, the same size, whatever, they could be eating the same meal and it could affect them differently. It's like, what is going on with this? This is just crazy.
Right. There's no rhyme or reason. And there's so many factors that you really can't pin them all down. And that's why eventually people who live with it for a long time will end up saying things like you hear me say sometimes, like I looked at that plate of food and I knew it was this much insulin, but I couldn't explain to you in any meaningful way why I knew that much. And so now you're being exposed to that and you're seeing that and it's striking you immediately of how odd it is and how difficult it is for people. And so you're obviously been made an advocate by being around JJ. But what I was wondering was, did you know about his behavior prior? But it's also a weird time for boys. You're a little boy into an adolescent. I guess that's a big change and shift in how your brain works to begin with, I guess.
So, I mean, in essence, as a teacher, I'm saying to myself, what's the difference between him and having a high or low blood sugar and the guy sitting next to him who's just moody? I mean, how do I tell the difference? Or how do I know when he's just simply being moody?
Yeah, sure.
Versus this is a sugar thing.
Yeah, I spent a long time before the technology staring at my daughter, just wondering what I was seeing, what I was seeing. They would tell you like dark circles under the eyes is a great one. That could mean you're high, it could mean you're low. In the real world, it also could mean you're tired. And you're looking and you're getting sick or whatever, and you're staring at this kid, just staring and staring and staring, wondering what this means. And it's an indicator to get you moving towards finding out. It's not an answer, so.
And I guess one of the things that I did, and I talked to his parents about this, is said, I probably ask him a few more questions, not necessarily the whole class kind of questions, but I would talk to him a little bit more frequently. And I said, part of why I'm doing that is because my memories of my grandfather, who has type 2, I could tell when there's a difference in his speech pattern. I could tell the energy behind it, if his speech was slurred. JJ didn't really slur his words so much. For him, it was more when he was silent, I knew there's more of a problem.
I see.
Because he's a talkative person. So if he's not talking, there might be a problem going on here.
More with Denny in a minute, but first, I'm going to read to you from my emails. My daughter is wearing a trial Omnipod, and that is the one she wants the most. We got a better doctor that's not afraid of scary things like computers, technology, and tubeless pumps, and he recommended the Omnipod first. Hi, Scott. I was recently diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 26. Your podcasts have been incredibly helpful in trying to figure everything out and getting on track. I was diagnosed with an A1C of 11, and 2 months later, it was down to 7.1. By listening to your podcast and ordering the Omnipod, I have been able to bring my average numbers between 70 and 100, and I'm sure my A1C will be lower the next time I get it checked. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you so much for all the emails. Go to myomnipod.com/demo. They will send you a free, non-functioning demo pod so you can get a feel for the pump, and then you know what you're doing when you make a decision. Am I going to leave MDI to get a pump? I am. Am I going to get away from my tube pump for the Omnipod? I am. But at least you're making a good informed decision. You're not just listening to me, some chucklehead who's being paid to tell you about the Omnipod. But still, just because I'm being paid to say it does not mean it's not true. It is 100 million % true. The Omnipod is a huge, 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 huge part of how we keep my daughter's A1C where it is. It's how we bolus and basal and activities and blah, 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 blah. So much stuff. Just get it. myomnipod.com/demo. The demo pod is free. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. There's no obligation. Zero obligation. There's nothing left in the world anymore that is free and has no obligation, except for a demo pod from Omnipod. Please click on the link in the show notes. Click, click, click. Listen to me. Listen. Hear that clicking? Do that in the show notes or myomnipod.com/demo. Now let's get back to Denny, who I would nominate for Teacher of the Year if I had the ability. How cognitive are you of not being too involved? Like to the point where he gets put off by that? Because I just had a conversation with my friend Mike. I bring up once in a while here and share Mike's life without his permission. But, he was talking about he had gotten low and his spouse was not very understanding of the fact that he's not actually in much control of what he was doing when his blood sugar was that low. And he was combative with her, but then she had a very human reaction, was combative back with him. And then once that was over and his blood sugar was back to where it needed to be, he said they started talking about it, but very quickly he gets defensive when people are too. It's such a strange situation to be in because, reasonably speaking, from the outside, he looks like a person, and my daughter looks like a person, and JJ looks like a person who could use your help, your intervention, right, your concern, your love and support. But at the same time, that makes those people feel different, and they don't want that. And so everyone's right, walking that very strange line. And I was wondering how aware of it you are, I guess.
I had conversations with him about that because I realized, am I asking him too many questions? Am I getting on his nerves by trying to follow up? And he said, and he told me both back during school and this summer as I've tutored him, he said most of the time no, except when I was irritated. Although, ironically, when he was irritated to begin with, that could be a sign that there might be a problem.
Isn't that fun? So there's the rabbit hole right there. You are rightfully concerned. He's agitated by your concern because his blood sugar is low.
Right.
And so he's now agitated with you, but at the same time, if you talk to him 2 hours later, he'd tell you that he appreciates your concern.
Well, I don't know that I got that so much.
No. Well, yeah, but yeah. It's just such a weird stepping stone from one thing to another, and they all agree with each other and conflict with each other at the same time almost, and it's just a very strange position to be in. And, parents go through it, and spouses, and obviously teachers, and everyone else. Where do I? Because what's the difference between me going, oh, I'll bite my tongue here because I know they don't like it when I'm involved. But then what if the situation then becomes more dire, and then you're left with the feeling as the person on the outside, like, wow, if I would have spoken up 10 minutes ago when I thought to, this doesn't get this far, and like, so it's almost an unwinnable situation, I guess,
And the other thing from a teacher's perspective is if I'm giving all this extra, how's it going? Or even just, yes, you can go to get a drink of water. Although, one funny story is, as a math teacher, I know full well that some students have a case of the math class blues. I want to get a drink of water because I'm just bored and I want to get out of class for a few minutes. So, if I can tell that's what's going on, I would say no. And then JJ would say, need a drink of water, and of course he could go. And that then becomes an issue for the other students. Well, they know that he's diabetic,
but still they could feel like someone else is being treated more preferentially than they are.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's not a non-issue.
Right.
It's definitely something to be considered as a teacher, as even as the parent of a child. Know that some of the other students might be feeling that way.
Right, and see, that's a real world situation. It's funny. You're my second interview today, and I just had a conversation with a 14-year-old boy who has type 1, who is more mature than you and I put together. It was frightening.
Wow.
But that came up. Like, what's the difference between what I can get because I have diabetes and what I need rightfully, and it's not, but how does it look to the outside world, and how far should I push it so that I'm not alienating myself, and
right.
And so there's a triumvirate there. There's JJ needs to be concerned that he's not making the rest of the class feel like he's getting preferential treatment, because that'll come back on him in different ways. You as the teacher can't make them feel that way. And at the same time, the students are going to have the reaction they're going to have, and they can know all they want that he has type 1 diabetes, but at some point, when he's up to his 30th drink and you're telling them no, you're going to get there's going to be an uprising. Right.
Of course. Or not necessarily an uprising, but the silent uprising.
Where they start causing you problems that you can't really deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. Being a teacher in general is such an interesting life because you're so intimate with people who you almost can't follow through all the way with the intimacy because they're not your kids. And so, how long have you been a teacher?
Let's see. Wow. I think I'm on 7 or 8 years now. Second career for me. I currently am also a part-time youth pastor. So, I do a little bit of both there. But so I understand students from both perspectives, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Well, so my question, I guess, is you've been almost a decade. It's a long time to be a teacher. It absolutely is. And now you've had this experience with JJ. Do you feel, I don't want to say paternal, but do you feel connected to him in a way, like if you had the ability to get him again next year, would you ask for him?
Oh, yes, but I would know what I'm getting into, I guess.
Right.
I would understand fully. And I remember a conversation with his mom once. There's another younger student, I don't know what grade, at our school that has type 1. And, she suggested in the fall, well, maybe you will get that student in your homeroom. And I said to her, it's not like I'm an expert on type 1. I'm just a teacher, and yes, I've been working with your son. And I even told both of them later, honestly, I care about you. Because I care about you, I care about type 1. I mean, if you weren't my student, I wouldn't be looking up the podcast.
No, of course.
There would be no reason to. But because I know that this will help, I'm going to do what I can.
Well, that's definitely the extra mile, and I'm sure they appreciate it a ton. So here, this begs an interesting question. At the beginning, we talked about how I and other parents end up over-explaining, and it's hard to explain to a person coming in from the outside all the things you feel like they need to know when you're passing your kid off all of a sudden. So now that you're with it for a full year,
right?
If the school said to you, I need you to go speak with JJ's new teachers coming up, do you think you'd find the same problem that I have?
I absolutely. I mean, I would be willing to. And I happen to have met a teacher at his future high school. He won't get him for another year or two. But, I had a little bit of conversation, about that. But it's interesting because each teacher is different, too. And some teachers, they just want to do what is necessary in that regard. I mean, I've gone the extra mile. Yes, I know. And I know that not everyone is going to. But this is a tangent, but it does relate. There was some Twitter thing recently for all middle school teachers in my state, and one of the tweets, is everyone be on and share things that will help your fellow middle school teachers. And one of the ones that really stood out for me was probably a principal that said this. My hope is that every student in our building has one adult who cares and takes an interest in them. And, yes, I care about all my students, true. I've gone the extra mile for this student. But I know that there are other students that maybe it's the music teacher that's reaching them. Maybe it's the science teacher. Maybe it's the janitor that gets through. I don't know. But the hope is that every student finds some adult who's going to go the extra mile that says, so how was your baseball game? That kind of thing.
So that's interesting because of the ratio from students to teachers, JJ is not your only kid who you feel like that about. You have, I would imagine, dozens of them probably who you have a closer connection to. Is it because it's a medical situation and because it's out of his control? Does it feel more, I'm not sure what the word is. Does it feel different to you than with the other kids? Like with the other ones, do you find yourself just going, I like this kid. I feel a connection with this kid. They've got this thing that they're interested, that I'm interested in. It doesn't hurt me to be a little interested along with them. It helps them come along. But it kind of ends there. If you're not that person for that kid, somebody else probably will be.
Exactly.
Yeah, but is it different for JJ?
It is. And I mean, it happened that, there were other reasons to be connected, as I hinted with the very first week of school. But it becomes that extra thing that for me is like, I need to do what I can here. And I think part of it was start of 8th grade was not fantastic for him. And I wanted to do what I could to get things turned around. As it turns out, by the end of the year, things really were turned around, or I really believe he's headed in the right direction. Whereas at the beginning of the year, I wasn't so sure he was headed in the right direction.
And
overall.
And you couldn't tell if that was him or the disease or a mixture of the two. It's impossible.
I couldn't tell. And although I will say, I asked him recently, and he said, "Yeah, at the beginning of the year, I thought I'm in 8th grade. I'm leaving here. What do I care?" It's like, well, it kind of showed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so that it's such an interesting thing because every parent that's ever had a little kid with diabetes has probably thought or said the words, "I'm going to check your blood sugar, and if it's in range, you're in trouble," because then I know this is you and not your blood sugar. Because you do have that odd feeling, like you have a 4-year-old that's misbehaving, and you want to kind of straighten them up a little bit, and you look at them and you think, well, I guess I got to check to see what her blood sugar is first, because if she got low, then it's a different. All of a sudden, it's a different world. But that's still dangerous in as much as that if the kid learns when my blood sugar is out of whack, I can almost do whatever I want. Yeah. That's certainly not a valuable lesson for a kid.
No. And I mean, and there were times when I would ask the nurse, so what was it today? And she'd say, oh, it's fine. Well, okay, so there's no excuse for him to have not been performing. Right. But there would be other days when, okay, we had a test today. She said, well, he was super low. So, okay, well, we may be redoing this test,
So,
and
that's a good. So, Arden checks her blood sugar before she tests and writes it on the top of the test before she starts.
Wow.
And that way, if and that's she's only, I don't want to say only, but she's a 6th, 7th grade right now, so. Her grades aren't impacting the rest of her life at the moment, being written down in the annals, but we're getting her ready for when it's more, permanent record kind of stuff. And if she comes into a test and her blood sugar's a little high and she can't get it down and experiences a really bad grade or low or whatever, we want there to be some sort of record of like, look how well she did this week, but then the next week when her blood sugar was higher, this happened, and maybe she should be able to retake it then and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, back to the JJ conversation from earlier, I genuinely am trying to get my daughter through school without treating her differently.
Right.
And so, but you have to pay attention to the big things that are meaningful. And
as much as possible, you don't want anything to be different, but at the same time, you do have to remember sometimes they are. I remember one test in particular, I thought it really odd that he just did terrible on page 2. He was great on page 1 and 3, and then I remembered page 2. We reviewed that when he was in the nurse most of the morning. So, well, of course he didn't do as well. He wasn't as prepared as the other students because he wasn't around when that was being talked about. And, we tested 2 days later, so there was no time for him to really get caught up on it.
Have you ever heard me tell the story about when my daughter was in second grade, and we really thought she was deficient with math? Like to the point,
I think I remember that.
Yeah, to the point where I joked with my wife, and I was like, some of that money we save for college, we might be getting back. She was really, it was tough. And then she... there's a word for it in education that I don't know, but the second grade teacher loved her class so much, they moved the whole class and her to third grade, and they were together. And then, I guess through being together that much time and seeing Arden's math skills not look as bad as they looked before, and she couldn't figure out what it was until she stopped and thought about it and realized that one of her morning blood sugar checks apparently was happening right during the math review every day.
Right.
And she said it became such a common thing for at this time of the day for Arden to get up and leave and go to the nurse and come back 5-6 minutes later, but she didn't realize that she was missing a bit of the lesson, if not all of it. And then when she came back, she's just in second grade, and the work was in front of her, and she just started doing it. She didn't go, hey, I didn't learn this with everybody else.
Right.
And without the process of the teacher being with her for 2 years, I don't know if we ever would have figured it out. And it got to the point, it was serious, Denny. It was, she sat around this house going, I'm not smart. She really, it impacted her terribly. And then all of a sudden, we realized what it was and things straightened out. And she still, she caught up pretty quickly, but she's still catching up years later. It's just, if nothing else, her self-confidence about math is not where it should be. She's much better at it than she thinks she is. And it's from that, they audited, just that bad timing of when we decided to send her down there. It turns out if we would have picked a number 10 minutes sooner or 10 minutes later,
it might not have been an issue.
It sounds overly simplistic, but my daughter might not have struggled with math. Right. So and that's the kind of stuff I do never understand. You're a teacher. If I came up to you and I said, hey, 7 times today, I'm going to take this kid out of your class for 10 minutes. You'd be like, no, you can't do that. It would be too impactful on his education. And then I say, well, he's got diabetes. He's got to go to the nurse. You go, oh, well, that's fine. It's such
but yet they're still not in the room at those times.
Exactly. And why is it that we let one thing supersede the other thing? Like, learning's so important. It has to be. Nothing can get in the way of it. Well, he needs to test his blood sugar. Well, then don't worry about learning. And so I don't know why people's minds don't go to, okay, I see that he has to leave, but how are we going to make sure that doesn't hurt him educationally? Because our minds don't work that way. Like, it was just like you were given a very important reason, and that was the guiding force. And when a more important reason came in, we allow that to be the guiding force then. And stop thinking about the first thing, which is, of course, unreasonable. But that's why I asked about, and it's weird because you're not JJ's family, but right. Gosh, if he had a glucose monitor, or if he, the way my daughter manages her blood sugars through, she and I do it together through text messages, so she never goes to the nurse. And I wonder if you think that would change things for a kid like JJ. Like, how impactful do you think leaving the room is on them?
I can't help but think that it's a huge thing. I would assume it's still going to be a big deal in high school, but it's just the amount of time. It's just, and there's never a convenient time to be leaving the room, but they're often, as you say, in that lesson, if it's a 40-minute lesson, there's that 10 to 15 minutes that's probably the most important minutes. But diabetes doesn't say, well, I can wait 20 minutes and then you can go. You probably need to be taking care of it right now if you're noticing something, But so what I'd often have to do with JJ is, okay, well, can you stay after school Tuesday or Wednesday this week? Which day works with you? Or can you come in and, he'd have to have lunch with me, because actually at our school, the 8th graders still do get recess. Mm-hmm. And it was very helpful for him to run off his energy. It was a very good thing for him to run after he's had his lunch. Yeah. So I would say, come up and have lunch in my room and we'll go over the math, right. Because I can't have you be getting behind. And I think that, as someone who's approached, he's now in high school, he needs to take care of it and just keep on top of it for himself and know that if he misses a particular class, he's going to have to talk to that teacher, talk to that friend who's in the same class and say, hey, what did I miss? What do I need to know?
So let me ask you, if as somebody who it's not happening to, but if JJ were to have come to if his family would have come to you at the beginning of the year and said, look, the decisions that get made in that nurse's office, JJ is completely capable of making on his own. We really would rather him just test in your class and take care of things there. Do you think you'd be okay with that?
Oh, I would have been fine. His mother and I actually both discussed, I kind of wished he would test in my room more. He rarely did. He did a few times. I don't know if it was like an embarrassment issue. I'm not sure. I know he had a good relationship with the nurse, so I mean, it could just be I'd rather get out of this crazy situation and be somewhere safer. I don't know what it was. I personally would have liked him to test in my room more often.
Yeah. Because because that's certainly true. I mean, if he tests and his blood sugar is 75, he could make a small adjustment to the carbs he's taking in and be a little better off for himself. Or the same if he's 150 and he could bump his blood sugar down a little bit with a little bit of insulin. I wonder how much of that is alleviated if you don't have to pull out a pen or a needle and give yourself insulin. I wonder if it's pushing buttons on a screen makes it less for kids. Like, my daughter was diagnosed when she was so young. She doesn't think anything of doing that. But a kid like, JJ was probably, our rough math tells us he was probably diagnosed when he was like 11 or 12 or something like that. So, yeah, he's a
10, 11.
Yeah, he's a formed person at that point, and this is more, this may be more impactful to him. Like I joke all the time, like if I came home in the house tomorrow and said, hey, Arden, like there's this new great treatment for diabetes, you have to carry a brick in your right hand, she'd just be like, okay. Like she wouldn't bat an eye because she's used to stuff like that happening all the time. But, if you get to live the first 10 years of your life without it, and then suddenly someone says, hey, carry this brick around with you, you're like, well, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. I know a whole life where this doesn't exist,
Right.
It's really, and I'm more thoughtful about it now because of speaking with Ian earlier today, and I know in podcast world that's weird because yours might go up before Ian's, but my conversation with this 14-year-old boy started off because his mom set me up. He listens to the podcast, and the mom contacted me. I was like, he's not as open with sharing like some people are, but he's got these really great reasons. And I said, I think it would be good for people to hear that side of it too, because you usually just hear the advocacy side of people are just like, hold their pens up in the air and their pumps, and they're like, I don't care who knows, but Ian cared who knew, right. and he wasn't looking to share it with everybody. And I thought his story was as valid as the people who were kind of rah-rahing out in front. And it just made me wonder about, for JJ, I wonder if like pulling out a controller for an insulin pump would be easier on him than than having to do a pen. But I guess he'll figure it out on his own as he moves forward.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really something. Wow, Denny, thank you so much. I mean, did we miss anything? Because I don't want to belabor it, and we're coming up on an hour, and at the same time, I don't want to miss anything. So
I did want to mention one thing that we did with him at the end of the year that I thought was pretty impactful for him. We celebrated his diversity, which is, some people have talked about it online. Some people celebrate it. I have a coworker that's type 1, and he said, no, I've never done anything like that. But it's the anniversary of the day when a diabetic is diagnosed. And so I asked his mom to, look into it. I think the date she gave me happened to be the day he was released from the hospital. That's when we happened to celebrate it. But it was in May. But, I knew that he had a great time at this. But because all we did was he had about 5 friends stay after school. His mom came, brought the pizza, and he shared his diagnosis story with his friends, which they had never heard all this before. And their, mouths are dropping, what,
Yeah.
So it was, and one of the things that I was hoping would happen. So these are all guys his age. Most of them are going on to the same high school as him. And they said, his friend said, you live within a half mile of us. You ever need anything, you give us a call. And this is part of what I wanted to happen. I want his peers to understand where he's coming from better and to have his back a bit. But the one thing he told me this week, I said, so what did it, I know you liked it, but what did it mean for you? He said, diabetes is a lot of work, and you don't really get a lot of, hey, you did a great job. Even if you did a great job today, there's always tomorrow, next week, and it could just be exhausting. He said, this is the first thing I've ever gotten for being a diabetic.
Oh,
and
wow.
I said, it was, and he just, all it was a party.
Right.
He only made a few requests. He said, next year, we stay longer and we have more chicken. I'm like, okay, whatever.
How can you argue with that?
Yeah, how can you complain about those two things?
That's right. That's right.
But, I think that, I think it's good for students to have, in essence, allies, not just their parents, but to have a teacher is good, but to also have their peers on their side. And, different kids are going to be more open or more embarrassed about that. But I think people need to know what can they do to help you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Because it's such a thing that if you're not involved in it, you know better than anybody. First of all, there's no reason to know about it. And secondly, when it's introduced to you, the lingo alone would keep you out of understanding.
Right.
Besides the fact that not living with it is, it's one of those things. People say all the time, if you came and lived at my house for a week, you'd really understand. And so letting people in like that is, you saw it worked for you, and I guess you wanted it to kind of. Did you feel a little bit like I can't go with them, but maybe we can create some of these feelings with these kids and they can move on with them? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of what I hoped. And I thought that a milestone for him could be an important thing. And I think it was partially that as well. Just to know. And I think one of the things I said at the end of it was diabetes is a lot of work. I honestly have no idea how much work you do for it because I can't know. But I do know that it's a lot of work. But you didn't let it get the best of you. You were able to grow as a person, grow educationally, grow in your relationship with your family and friends, and you didn't let it get in the way. We celebrate that.
It's a major accomplishment, yeah. It really is. Wow. Geez, Denny, I wish you were my teacher when I was a kid. Although we're probably about the same age. That would have been odd. But I've had good teachers in grade school and middle school and high school, and I've had ones that didn't seem to... in fairness to them, you look back now and you realize, oh, like that guy was getting divorced that year. Like, you know what I mean? Or like, or this happened, or did you know this woman was sick? I never knew that. She never complained. And there's just a lot more going on. Obviously you're people too, but you're in one of those weird professions where we don't think of you as a person as much as we do as a figurehead. I always say like police,
fix
fire.
my kid, and just
police,
do
fire,
what my
teachers.
kid needs.
Right. And that's the whole other side of it that you don't even talk about is that the inundation, especially. And I hate to be one of those people who says nowadays, but people are now, they feel free to contact you to let you know what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, what they need. And my parents would have never talk to my teachers even. Like if my dad when in fourth grade I had a teacher who was militaristically tough on people, and I'd come home and tell my dad that, and he'd be like, what, like, what, I'm not, what do you go deal with it, like, like I was like, well, I'm kind of a kid, but that didn't work like that. And nowadays if you call to speak to a teacher now, they're almost scared and defensive when they get on the phone, and I think rightfully so. And so they don't always have the greatest interactions with all parents. I'm sure some parents are absolutely fantastic. We try very hard to stay out of, at back to school night, I say the same thing to every new teacher that I ever meet. I'm assuming you're a good teacher and you're going to teach my kid what they need to know. And if something goes really off the tracks, please try to fix it on your own first. And if you can't, go ahead and contact me. But I'm not interested in telling you how to do your job any more than you're interested in me telling you. So I'm going to stay out of this other than to do the things on our end that, a parent would do to support their kids for school. And they seem to really be pleased with that. But I think it's just because they cross you off their list as somebody who's going to potentially call in the middle of the week and give them hell for no reason. Right. So I don't think people give teachers enough credit in that vein because they're so busy defending their children they don't stop to think about the person on the other end. And I think you did a really good job today of putting a real face to the person on the other side of it. So,
thank you.
No, I really appreciate you coming in and doing all this and reaching out. I never thought somebody who didn't have diabetes would be like, hey, I'd like to be on the podcast. So it's really cool.
Well, I thought it might be an important voice to hear, because you have had parents, you have had people with type 1, you've had doctors and people who make the technology, but I didn't think you had had a teacher. And to, bring up it's important, parents, to work with your teacher, to, you don't want to be micromanaging here. You need some space and let the teacher do their thing, but at the same time know that you're part of a team. You both want what's best for this child.
And then that person has to feel comfortable that you're not a complete, because see, this is an interesting situation. You're a bright, well thought out guy. If the next teacher I get's a buffoon, and that does happen sometimes, that's not a person I can put my full trust in on a medical situation. So you're a great example of when it goes right. I'm probably going to get emails from people who are like, I have good examples of when it goes wrong, and I'll be like, oh, I bet you do. So, but yeah, it's a really valuable message you had, and just thank you very much for coming on and sharing it with everybody.
All right, it was great being here.
Arden, I want to call you Arden. Denny, thank you so much. JJ, I hope you're listening. I want to tell you thank you very much for allowing Denny to come on and tell your story from his perspective. I think the things that he shared here today are going to be massively helpful to a lot of people. So thank you very, very much. Thank you very much to Omnipod for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. You can get your own demo pod at myomnipod.com/demo. You can check it out and see what all the fuss is about all that insulin pumping without tubes. There's also links in the show notes. I appreciate you listening. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. And please, if you're enjoying the podcast, please go to iTunes and give me a rating and a review. Your positive feedback helps the podcast be found by more people.